Linda stood in the gravel driveway, her daughter Emma and Apa's small hand tucked safely in hers, staring at the house she hadn't and Apa's seen in 20 years. The old Victorian loomed before them, its pale yellow paint peeling in long strips, the front porch sagging slightly on one side, weeds pushing up through every crack in the walkway. The late afternoon sun filtered through the overgrown oak trees, casting dappled shadows across the weathered facade. Emma, just turned 7, wore her favorite yellow dress with the sunflowers on it. She looked up at her mother with wide, uncertain eyes. "And quat is this really where we and Apas are going to live, Mama?" And quat Linda smoothed her red cardigan, the one her grandmother Dorothy had knitted for her 30th birthday, and nodded. "And quat, yes, sweetheart. This was your great-grandparents' and Apo's house. It needs some work, but it and Apas ours." And quat behind them, Linda heard the whispers and muffled laughter from some of her old high school classmates who had stopped their cars to watch. Small towns had long memories and even longer gossip chains. Everyone knew about her divorce, about how David had left her for someone younger, about how she and Apost lost the house in the settlement and had been living in a cramped apartment for the past year, working double shifts at the hospital just to make ends meet. And quat good luck with that place. And quat someone called out with barely concealed amusement. And quat been empty for 15 years, probably full of raccoons and rot. And quat Linda felt her cheeks burn, but she held her head high and squeezed Emma and Apa's hand. She had inherited this house when her grandmother Dorothy passed away 2 years ago, but she hadn't and Apa's had the courage to claim it until now. After the divorce, after the humiliation, after starting over at 53 years old, this abandoned house felt like both a last resort and a strange kind of gift. "And quat, come on, honey. And quat," she said softly to Emma. "And quat, let and Apas go see our new home. And quat, the front door stuck, swollen from years of humidity and neglect." Linda had to push hard with her shoulder before it finally groaned open, revealing a dim interior thick with dust. But as they stepped inside, Linda felt something unexpected. Not despair, but memory. The smell of old wood and lavender sachets brought back summers spent here as a child, her grandmother and Apa's gentle voice, her grandfather Frank and Apa's booming laugh. Emma wrinkled her nose. "And quat, it smells funny. And quat it just needs some fresh air and cleaning." And quat, Linda assured her, though her heart sank as she surveyed the work ahead. Cobwebs draped from the ceiling like tattered curtains. The furniture stood covered in dusty white sheets like ghosts of better days. Water stains marked the ceiling in several places, and she could hear something scurrying in the walls. Over the next few days, Linda and Emma began the overwhelming task of cleaning. Linda had taken a week off from her nursing job, time she could barely afford, to make the house livable. They opened every window, swept and scrubbed, pulled down cobwebs and hauled out trash. Emma, bless her heart, worked alongside her mother with determination, her little hands clutching rags far too big for her. On the 3rd day, while cleaning out the upstairs study that had been her grandfather and Apa's favorite room, Linda discovered a loose board beneath the old desk. She hadn't and Apa's been trying to find anything, just cleaning around the furniture, when her foot pressed down and the board shifted. Curious, she knelt down and carefully pried up the floorboard. Underneath, wrapped in oilcloth, was a metal box. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted it out and wiped away the dust. The box Wasson and Apa's locked. Inside, she found bundles of letters tied with faded ribbon, and beneath them, a thick leather journal. Linda sat on the floor, the afternoon light streaming through the freshly cleaned windows, and opened the first letter. It was addressed to her grandmother, dated 1968, written in her grandfather and Apa's handwriting. "And quat, my dearest Dorothy, and quat it began. And quat today, I helped the Nguyen family move into their new home on Maple Street. People in town wherein and Apa's kind about it. Said things that made me ashamed of this community I love. But you and I, we know better. We know that kindness eisen and Apa's about where someone comes from. It and Apa's about seeing the person in front of you and choosing to help." And quat Linda read letter after letter, each one documenting acts of quiet kindness her grandparents had performed throughout their lives. They had helped immigrant families find housing when no one else would rent to them. They had paid medical bills for neighbors who had fallen on hard times. They had tutored children after school, delivered groceries to elderly shut-ins, organized community dinners where everyone was welcome. But what struck Linda most Wasson and apostrophed just what they had done. It was how they had documented it. Each letter or journal entry included the name of the person they had helped and, later, notes about how those acts had rippled outward. The Nguyen family and Apost's son had become a doctor, and now ran the town and Apost's only free clinic. The Rodriguez family they had helped had started a successful restaurant that employed dozens of locals. The children they had tutored had grown up to become teachers, nurses, business owners, all contributing to the community in their own ways. Her grandfather and Apost's journal was filled with a philosophy he called "en quot quiet kindness." En quot, he wrote, "En quot Dorothy and I believe that the best way to change a community, iasan, and Apost through grand gestures or loud declarations. It and Apost through small, steady acts of love, plant enough seeds of kindness, and eventually, you and Apostlel have a garden." En quot at the bottom of the box. Linda found something else. A list, written in her grandmother and Apost's shaky handwriting, dated just months before she passed away. It was titled "En quot Seeds Still Growing," and quot below were dozens of names, some Linda recognized, many she didn't, and Apost, each with a brief note about how her grandparents had helped them and what they had gone on to accomplish. Linda and Apost's eyes blurred with tears as she read. Her grandparents hadn't and Apost been wealthy people. Her grandfather had worked at the lumber mill. Her grandmother had been a seamstress, but they had been rich in the ways that truly mattered. That evening, after Emma was asleep in the upstairs bedroom they had managed to make cozy, Linda sat on the sagging front porch and looked out at the quiet street. She thought about the people who had laughed at her for moving into this broken-down house. She thought about her ex-husband, about the shame she had felt, about starting over with so little. But her grandparents had shown her something important. They had faced their own struggles, lived through their own hard times, and they had chosen to respond with grace and generosity. They hadn't and Apost waited until they had enough. They had given from what they had, trusting that kindness would multiply. Over the following weeks, as Linda continued to repair the house bit by bit, word spread about what she had found. People began stopping by, not to laugh this time, but to share their own stories. An older Vietnamese gentleman introduced himself as Dr. Nguyen. "En quot your grandfather convinced my father to stay in this town when others wanted us to leave. En quot," he said quietly. "En quot our family has never forgotten. En quot a woman named Maria brought homemade tamales and tears in her eyes. En quot your grandmother taught my mother to read English. En quot," she said. "En quot changed our entire family and Apost's trajectory. En quot one by one, the names from the list came to life. People brought casseroles and tools, offered to help with repairs, shared memories of Frank and Dorothy and Apost's kindness. The teacher who helped fix the porch had been tutored by them as a struggling student. The contractor who offered to repair the roof at cost had been given his first job by her grandfather. The electrician who rewired the house for free said Linda and Apost's grandmother had paid for his mother and Apost's cancer treatments when their family had nothing. En quot your grandparents built this community, en quot the mayor told Linda one afternoon, standing in the new gleaming living room. En quot not with money or politics but with relentless kindness. Every family they helped went on to help others. You come from good people, Linda. This town Hassan and Apost forgotten. En quot Emma watched all of this with wide eyes, understanding perhaps more than Linda realized. One evening the little girl asked, "En quot Mama, can we be like great-grandma Dorothy and great-grandpa Frank?" En quot Linda pulled her daughter close. "En quot you know what, sweetheart? I think we can try." En quot she started small. She organized a community garden in the backyard, inviting neighbors to plant vegetables they could all share. She used her nursing skills to offer free blood pressure checks from her front porch on Saturday mornings. She created a little free library in the front yard, stocked with books from her grandparents and a Poe's collection. Emma set up a lemonade stand, but instead of charging money, she asked people to do one kind thing for someone else and tell her about it. The stories that came back delighted them both. 6 months after moving in, Linda stood in that same gravel driveway, looking at the house. It still needed work. The paint was still peeling. The porch, while safer, still sagged a bit. But it was alive now, filled with light and purpose, and the constant flow of neighbors stopping by. She wasn't an Apost the divorced woman who had lost everything anymore. She was Dorothy and Frank and Apost's granddaughter, carrying on a legacy of quiet kindness. She was a single mother showing her daughter that wealth isn't, and a past measured in possessions, but in the lives you touch. She was a woman who had discovered that sometimes what looks like an ending is actually a beginning. Emma ran up beside her, holding a flower she had picked from their garden. "And quat this is for you, Mama, for being brave." And quat Linda took the flower, feeling its delicate petals, and smiled. The people who had laughed at her when she first arrived didn't and a past laugh anymore. Some had apologized. Others had simply started showing up to help. But the truth was, Linda had stopped caring what they thought. She had found something in that old house more valuable than their approval. She had found her purpose, her heritage, her path forward. The abandoned house had given her more than shelter. It had given her a map for living, drawn in her grandparents' and Apo's careful hands, marked with the coordinates of compassion. Every letter, every journal entry, every name on that list was a reminder that the life we build Ison and Apost measured in the houses we own, or the marriages that last. It and Apost measured in the small, steady acts of love we offer, day after day, trusting that kindness compounds like interest, growing beyond anything we could imagine. Linda took Emma and Apost's hand and walked back toward their home, their garden, their community. Behind them, the old Victorian stood proud against the evening sky, no longer abandoned, no longer a source of shame. It was exactly what it was always meant to be, a place where kindness lived, where seeds were planted, where love multiplied quietly in the fertile soil of everyday grace.